Many people are still in mourning over the recent shootings in both Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas. Many are also calling for another gun ban. But do they actually work? Joining me now from Toronto is award-winning journalist Brian Lilley. Now, Brian, do gun bans work? What are the underlying issues here?
Well, I don't think it would work in Canada. A lot of people point to Britain or Australia. Those are countries that by water. They still have gun problems, by the way, but they're surrounded by water. They don't share the longest undefended border in the world with the world's biggest gun market. And look, while the Americans were dealing with their two mass shootings in Dayton and El Paso, there were 17 different people shot in 14 different incidents over the long weekend here in Toronto. That's not counting any other shootings across the country. So that was happening, and of course that's a real concern for anybody that lives here. However, the guns that are used in crimes in this country are generally, for the most part, stolen, smuggled, illegal guns from the United States. They are not Canadian guns. So you've got people that are already in violation of about a half dozen laws, from storage to illegal possession, pointing a firearm, all of these things. It could land them in jail for 10 years or more. They're already violating the law. Why on earth would they suddenly say, oh, there's a gun ban. I paid $3,000 for this gun on the black market. I can't use it now. They're not going to follow the gun ban. And those people are the problem. Taking the guns away from law abiding citizens that just go to the range and don't cause trouble will not stop the shootings in places like Toronto, Edmonton, Vancouver, Halifax, or anywhere else.
You know, what's something really interesting as a Canadian, when I see some of my American friends down in the States open carry, they've got their guns, and they're walking into Walmart for some ammo, a sidearm. It blows my mind when I see that as a Canadian, right?
And we have very strict gun laws in this country. So automatic rifles are banned. You have to register your handguns. Handgun registration still exists. It exists for restricted rifles, like an AR-15. You have to pass background checks, a safety course. You're vetted by the RCMP constantly. So we have most of the gun laws that American, gun control advocates call for. We don't need to be adding anything more.
Now, the trade war has escalated between Washington and Beijing. Brian, Canada could be caught in the crossfire. Tell me more about that.
In many ways, we already have been, but since the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, it has been an ongoing attack on Canada by China. But now the two countries are escalating. So the Americans put in place a bunch of tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. The Chinese retaliated by saying, our state-owned enterprises will no longer buy American agricultural produce. That's going to hit American farmers. The Americans declared China a currency manipulator because they started devaluing their currency in response to the American action. So, we're going to get hit. Chinese goods will become cheaper to buy here, which could displace some Canadian manufactured goods. Our goods will be more expensive to export into China. The ones that we can, our canola, soy, pork, and beef are all being effectively blocked. We could end up receiving end of some unwanted attention from the Chinese government, and it's not going to help our industries, our farmers, and it's not going to help the two Michael Spavor and Kovrig get out of jail for what amounts to trumped up charges.
The federal Liberals are looking at revamping EI, but were recently warned off the idea over concerns the changes could hurt them this fall when the federal election rolls around.
Yeah, you talk to Stephen Harper or Jean Chrétien about revamping EI and what that can do to you. Both of them basically wiped out in Atlantic Canada, where they rely on EI, an unhealthy amount as far as I'm concerned. But Stephen Harper was the last one to try and say, look, we need to put in some controls on this program to keep it sustainable. And you may have to drive further to go for a job. You can't just look in your own neighborhood. That had the Conservatives, that helped wipe them out in Atlantic Canada in the 2015 election. So the Liberals were looking at some changes. They're trying to figure out what to do about heavy repeat users. They're trying to figure out about sustainability, the kinds of problems that every government, whoever's in charge, is going to have to deal with. it's rather sad that one region of the country that relies heavily on EI is going to stop meaningful change to the program because, well, you need to win some seats down there if you want to be able to form government.
Brian, I noticed that our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Newfoundland recently, talking about, hey, let's sweep like we did in 2015. He was also in BC as well. From one coast to the other coast, I'm not talking about his carbon footprint here, but do you think the Liberals are that strong in British Columbia and in Newfoundland?
No, I don't. I don't expect them. Look, the Liberals could still win the election. If it were held today, I'd say their best shot would be a minority government. I think at this point, a conservative minority is more likely, but I haven't written the Liberals off. But look, they swept all 32 seats in Atlantic Canada last time. It's going to be very difficult to repeat that. They went from 2 seats in British Columbia to, I believe, 19, an increase of 17 seats. Um, I don't think they're going back down to 2, but I don't think that they'll keep all the seats that they have now. They're going to lose some in the Okanagan Valley, in the northern British Columbia, the interior. They're going to also have trouble. And so people in those areas are upset at the Liberals over blocking resource development, including pipelines. And then you get into the lower mainland, and they're upset that they bought a pipeline and keep saying that it's going to go through. So he's got trouble on many fronts. And talk to people in the know. They'll tell you this is not a national election we're about to have. It's a series of local and regional races that will be decided on different factors. So we know that the four Liberals that were elected in Alberta last time are likely going to all be unemployed in October. I'll be surprised if they keep any of those seats, but across the country, they're going to win in some areas, win more. In other areas, they're going to lose. It's going to be very difficult for them to hold on to what they had in 2015.
Here in the West, we can't be naive to believe that, the West will have a major voice when it comes to the election, because once people in Ontario and Quebec vote, and if they vote a majority a certain way, a lot of times that forms government. Unfortunately, that's kind of like how we look at it out here in the West, and then we're going to vote for the official opposition. But let me ask you something, Brian. When it comes to Ontario and Quebec right now, has Andrew Shearer made any headway, or is it still too close to call between Trudeau, Shearer, and how about Jagmeet Singh?
The NDP is doing poorly in Quebec. They're doing okay in Ontario from the polls I've been looking at. The Conservatives, I expect them to take several more seats this time in the federal election in October. They're going to win seats that they didn't last time. They'll take some away from the NDP, some away from the Liberals, perhaps. The Liberals are still the strongest party in Quebec. In Ontario, look, there have been some polls that say the Doug Ford factor has completely depressed Andrew Shearer's ability to win seats. I don't think that's the case. I think that's been overstated. Has the Ford government hurt them to a degree? Absolutely. But Shearer and the Conservatives are still ahead. So, you get out of the downtown core of Toronto, you get into that, well-known and elusive 905 voter. There's a lot of those people that are looking for change in this coming election. And that's really because in so many other parts of the country, Hal, everyone's already decided who they're voting for. The swing areas are the 905 around Toronto and the suburbs around Vancouver. And that's why you're going to see an awful lot of attention paid by all the parties to those regions. Yeah, they're going to be coming, you expect Andrew Scheer to be going through places like Lethbridge and Calgary and Red Deer and Edmonton, but he needs to spend more time in Richmond Hill and Oakville and Oshawa because he knows he's going to win the seats in Alberta. He's got to focus on winning the seats that are up for grabs in Ontario.
Brian, the feds have been warned to fight back against populism, that they really need to focus on the majority instead of diversity. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this was from a working group of senior ministers who looked at, how do you push back against populism? And look, populism is a term that is, it can describe parties on the left or the right or the center. It is not just Donald Trump, but this idea that as you watch Brexit, as you watch angry people who feel like their country is fading away in some manner, then they start looking towards a certain type of populism. And so this was about dealing with that issue. And they said, look, constantly talking about diversity, constantly talking about this minority group and that minority group, but not talking about the whole, makes people in the majority feel like, well, don't I count? And they said, You've got to talk about the majority. You've got to talk about, uh, you know, things that unite us rather than breaking everyone down into little groups. I'm not sure that the government's listened to that message. It can be great to talk about diversity, but if all you talk about are small minority groups, then yeah, you are going to alienate an awful lot of people who say, do I have to belong to one of these groups to matter to the government? And no one should question that. Just like people in the minority groups want a shout out, guess what? So does everyone. Everyone wants to feel like they're welcome and that they belong in Canada. I think they've gone too far on the pendulum in favor of diversity. And I think this memo from senior bureaucrats was just kind of a warning shot saying, tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, giving the silent majority a voice is pretty important these days. A new book on Justin Trudeau is causing some waves and bringing back the India trip debacle. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is a book by National Post columnist John Ivison. It's one of two Trudeau books coming out just before the election. The other one from a journalist called Aaron Weary. They had an excerpt in the paper the other day, and it talked about that India trip. And Jerry Butts, in an interview that he did when he was still in the Prime Minister's office, he blamed the Indian government. He said they were out to get us. They were out to help the Conservatives. It kind of brought the whole issue back up. And then on Friday, I was at an event with Andrew Shearer where he was announcing some healthcare measures in his platform. And I asked him about that. And he said, this is just proof that Justin Trudeau and his team can't take the blame for anything. You think about that trip, it was the outfits that he wore, it was inviting the terrorists to dinner, and it was flying a chef at huge expense over to India to cook Indian food in India. And all of those things were self-inflicted wounds by the Liberals, but they keep bringing it up. I'm telling you, Hal, this is a fun book to read. It's interesting. There's going to be a lot that you've heard of before, but it's also giving some insight, including a Liberal MP, to go back to the last topic, a Liberal MP who said they play the politics of division more than Stephen Harper ever did, and he's not sure that Justin Trudeau gets that that's a bad thing.
Now, you brought this up just a moment ago here. Federal Conservative leader Andrew Shearer is laying out a platform including a promise on health funding.
Yeah, so he knows that he's going to be attacked and accused of cutting and slashing and burning, and you can't elect Andrew Shearer, or Granny will be put on a snowbank and or an ice floe and sent off to die, and she won't get health care. That's going to be the general attack from the Liberals and the NDP regarding the Conservatives. And it happens every election. He knows it. So he came out with his healthcare pledge. And he said that he will pledge to increase transfers for health and social services by a minimum of 3%. Now, the Liberals jumped up and attacked him on that and said, oh, so you're going to cut healthcare because, next year it's going to be 4.1%. is what the increase will be. And Shearer said, no, hold on. I said a minimum of 3%, and I'll follow the existing agreement that's in place, which, by the way, is a minimum of 3% plus population growth and inflation. So, he's saying, I'm going to stick with what's there. I'm not going to cut healthcare. We'll look for savings elsewhere. And he's still being attacked on it. So it was probably a wise political move on his part.
Do you think Canadians are really getting to know the real Andrew Shearer now? Because with Justin Trudeau, a lot of people say, what you see is what you get. He's a very charismatic, good-looking guy, and so forth. Jagmeet Singh, a lot of people say there are similar characteristics. But what about Andrew Shearer? Do Canadians know who he is now, leading up to the October 21st election?
Not yet, but I can tell you that they're trying to get him out there more. I just did an interview with him that I'll be rolling parts of it out over the weekend, so you can watch my social media feeds. They're trying to put him out and let people get to know who he is. They're trying to roll out more platform, because one thing I kept hearing was, well, you can't just oppose Trudeau. What are you proposing? And has he done enough? Surprisingly, he's rolled out more of his platform than I was aware of. So this healthcare thing is one angle. I've talked to him extensively about how he would handle foreign affairs, specifically what's going on with China. I think that's important. Talked to him about the issue of gun violence in our cities and said, well, what's your plan? And turns out he'd already released a very detailed plan that includes cracking down on gangs and bail for people involved in gun violence, things like that. So there's more to Andrew Shearer than most Canadians know. and there's more policy out there. So I think he's just got to keep talking and being out in public. When I was chatting with him, he had just flown in from Regina. He had a quick event near the airport in Toronto, and then was getting on another plane to Cape Breton. So he is going all over the place, full speed ahead.
You know, when I interviewed Andrew Shearer a couple of Calgary Stampedes ago at a bar stool in the middle of the Midway, you know, he's in Ottawa, but he represents Regina. I said, are you Riders? Are you Red Blacks? He says, Hal, you got to bleed green if you're in Regina, representing Regina, right?
Absolutely. And now his brother-in-law is the kicker, John Ryan.
Oh, there you go. See? One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.